People want that plan to say, how do I get out of this quick? And I'm here to tell you that that's what got me in this cycle, is trying to get out of something quick and trying to reinvent myself quicker than I probably was ready to. To me, it starts with permission just to sit and be uncomfortable, but also think about where you're going and who you are without the identity.
Anybody else have work up in the air and curious about what the future holds, maybe even looking to reinvent themselves? Then join in. Let's do this. Welcome back into the conversation, my reinventing friends. And today we're talking about something that almost nobody prepares us for. And it's not losing a job, it's losing the identity that came with the job. Now, for so many professionals, our careers become more than what we do. They become who we are. And we build our confidence around our title. We measure our value by our achievements. And we tell ourselves that if we just keep performing, keep climbing, keep producing, everything will work out. But what happens when the company restructures, when AI changes the rules, when your position or role disappears, or when the career you spent decades building suddenly no longer feels like the life that you want? Because that's what's happening to millions of people right now. It's why we're doing this podcast. Okay, now today's guest knows exactly what this all feels like. After nearly 30 years building an impressive corporate career, including serving as Chief Communications Officer, Jeff Curtis found himself on the receiving end of a corporate acquisition that eliminated the role that had defined much of his professional life. What followed wasn't some picture-perfect reinvention story, okay? It was uncertainty, identity loss, anxiety, questions about purpose, and ultimately a deeper understanding of what he calls professional identity purgatory, that uncomfortable space between who you were and who you're becoming. Now, he's captured that journey in his new book, Embracing Your Own Purgatory. And today we're going to have an honest conversation about what reinvention really looks like when life doesn't go according to plan. So I think this is a perfect conversation. Jeff, before we jump in, welcome into the conversation and into reinvention.
Thanks for having me, Todd. Appreciate it.
So let's just jump right into the deep end of the pool, man. When you went through this transition, okay, and all of a sudden, boom, the rug was pulled out from under you, and you went through this process of reinventing, when did you realize that it wasn't just about finding another job, but it was about figuring out who you were and what your identity was looking forward?
Yeah, I think part of it is when it came to the acquisition, the redundancy in the role, I hadn't been hit with the fact that I knew that I was very enmeshed in my career and I knew that it was my identity. And I think I was aware of all of that. What I didn't realize, though, there was the whole scaffolding that was built around me that helped support this identity. And so when it went away, I really didn't know what to do or what to feel because it was just so new. And a little bit of the story that I tell in the book that I think is helpful for your listeners is I immediately jumped into something else, as I had done for a majority of my career, because I just wanted to stay busy. So I went and did a fellowship at a university here in Chicago. That was a full academic year. So that allowed me to kind of kick the can down the road another 7 to 8 months, then jumped into consulting immediately. And so you can kind of see how I'm describing the patterns was I didn't want to confront it. And I didn't want to confront the fact that all of this scaffolding had been removed. And I was sitting there with really out of foundation, without any identity and without any direction of where I was going to go next. And so that was just a difficult piece, but I jumped into such old habits of just going, staying busy because I didn't want to deal with what had just happened. And that was the difficult part of it. Interestingly enough, my wife was like, it's going to hit you. It's going to hit you at some point. And I didn't believe her. I was like, nope, I'm fine.
So let's talk about this a little more, because this is actually what's happening. It's a phenomenon right now, and my listeners are somewhere along the journey. Not everybody has lost their job or is reinventing and jumping ship, but the conversation is what attracts people, right? And hearing stories like you about, hey, some pretty devastating things that happened. And you mentioned the word, you got confronted and then you kicked the can down the road. I mean, this is so common. It's what I'm seeing out there with my clients and all the people I'm working with. But you also mentioned your scaffolding. I want to understand just personally, like what scaffolding are you talking about? Is it the relationship with your wife, your kids, like your financial stuff? Like, what do you mean that part was expected, as you went through this transition?
I think it was just the job itself. It was discovering that the job had really been the scaffolding that held all of those things together,
Okay.
both the relationship with friends, family, financially, all of those things. It was just so enmeshed in me that I didn't realize that. And so when that goes away, what I had been really focused on for an entire 30 years of being that work identity, I didn't realize that it was holding all of those other things you mentioned together. So that's what I mean. It's that when that's pulled away, then you also have to look at how you're reinventing even those relationships. I mean, my wife knew that I was very intertwined in my work, and the work came first always. And she understood that. What I started to see though is how much I had ignored friendships, personal relationships, those things that I'm actually trying to take time to rebuild now and understand what it kind of means to be in those relationships again. It's not that I didn't go out with friends and do things. It's just that I was always so focused on the comfort that the job provided that I didn't really take full advantage of that. So now it's kind of, once that's all removed, kind of rebuilding those things and understanding exactly who I am outside of that identity that I had.
Yeah, it's very revealing, isn't it, to have that trajectory taken up. A lot of people don't realize how much their identity is entwined, right? This is why I wanted to have you on the show, because you really speak to this very well. Let's talk about the process, right? So you kind of kicked the can down the road. You went, to a university to get a degree. Talk to me about the process of when this started to get revealed. I think this will help people really understand what is in front of them potentially, as they're looking at reinvention. And again, it's not all negative, but you did go through a hard time. What were the realizations that you had? What started to happen for you where you're like, wait, something's like off. Like, I'm not feeling well. I'm not feeling like I know where my ground is right now. Or give me your words about the start of that process where it really did, like the enormity of the change started to hit you.
There was a psychological battle toward the end of the fellowship that I was doing of external validation. And I recalled, and I write about this in the book, an event that I was at in the fall. So right as I was exiting my corporate role, I asked another Fortune 50 chief communications officer, how long will I be relevant? When I'm exiting my corporate role, how long will I be relevant? Now, you may think, what an idiot to ask that type of question, because I think I knew the answer a little bit, and he actually put a time frame on it. He said, year, 18 months tops. And so that was very scary. I put that aside, but when it got time to nearing the end of the fellowship, I launched a consultancy. And I said, okay, you know what? I have to really stay relevant. I have to get back to that old identity. This is what makes me tick. I'm scared to lose all of what I had built. And so jumped into consulting, started doing that. And again, it was probably 60% of the reason was because of that relevancy comment. And that was scary. And so I started doing that, and I absolutely hated it. And I don't know what it was. I consulted for maybe 6 months, didn't like it. I didn't know if I missed the camaraderie of the team. I didn't know if I was questioning whether I could do the job or not that I had done on my own. All of those things started to just manifest themselves at the same time. And I got really depressed toward the end of 2024. And I felt that I really hit a low, and I didn't know where I was going and what I was doing. And that kind of just made me realize that I have to do something different. I have to do more exploration of myself. I have to find out kind of why I'm having these feelings and why this job or these jobs over the last 30 years were such a big deal that I can't escape it. Again, not to jump into the writing process, but that's really when I started writing the book. I said, I have to do something for myself to really understand where I've been and where I need to go in order to get better.
Yeah. You speak very eloquently to the process that I talk a lot about here on the show, which is reinventing yourself is a process.
Right.
And a lot of it is what you said, you get confronted, it's very revealing. And then there usually comes a point where there's some pain and suffering, where you then turn, if you're smart and quick, into some form of introspection, which is exactly what you just said. Like, why is this all so important to me? You start asking the bigger question, like, who am I? Like, what am I here to do? This life is like a blip in the matrix, like I say all the time, right? And it's like you're in that moment and you started to look at yourself. And I'm just curious about your process. Like, what did you do to start answering those bigger, even more philosophical questions? Were you reading different things? Like, what happened in that space while you're scared and you're like, oh my God, like the world is ending or some form of my identity is ending? What did you then look towards? How did you find some guidance, to something that has gotten to you to where you are today?
Therapy has always been a big part of my life. I really leaned into the therapist who I work with, who I'd worked with actually in my corporate role. He was kind of a corporate psychologist that did a lot of work with my team. And me personally, I continued to see him outside of work. That place felt safe to me because he knew me. And that's where I really started the conversation. Interestingly enough, when I was still in my corporate role, he told me I had a book in me and to just start writing things down just based on kind of how I was thinking and how I was thinking just about mental state, how I was thinking about leadership, all of those things. Obviously, it turned into a different direction, but still, I think his process helped me out considerably, and that's where I felt safe. But aside from that, I really didn't know where to turn. But he helped me along the way, kind of helped me start asking questions. Who am I without doing the thing that I was doing? And that's scary. That's a scary question because there aren't a lot of answers when you really didn't know yourself outside of your corporate identity and your professional identity. And so that was kind of the first question that set me down the path of really looking at patterns throughout the last 30 years of not only work, but earlier in my life, how I suppressed emotion along the way. Did I go from one job to another or one thing to another in order to just suppress? Or was it really motivation? Those types of things that he really helped me uncover, but ultimately I had to uncover for myself. And so a big part of that, again, was the therapy piece of it, but also when I really started to sit down and write, that's when the process started to kind of form around me. And I started learning more and more because more questions kept coming up along the way.
I just want to reiterate how important it is that what you're sharing around getting out of isolation. Like, I'm so glad that you said that you had a therapist. I think most people are doing this by themselves and struggling at night. And there's a process. You probably did that for a while too. My whole push is de-isolate yourself as fast as you possibly can. Start having conversations with people. You don't have to have a therapist. You don't have to have a coach like me. You can talk to ChatGPT about this stuff, but other humans are really useful here. More people are struggling with this phenomenon of potential reinvention than anyone knows about right now. I mean, like there are millions of people in our country alone, the US, that are in a similar boat to what you are describing yourself, or they know what's coming. And so we got to be proactive. And the idea of getting a coach, getting a therapist, starting to have these conversations, honest ones, and asking these bigger questions, who am I, is the only way out, right? Because it's the only place that you're going to find answers. So let's talk about your process a little bit, right? You have something to say on that, but I am curious about where this goes next and what you started to uncover. Obviously, writing was a thing for you, and I want to hear like what energy that brought into your life. But I think you had something to share on that piece.
Yeah, I did want to share because I think it's interesting to note as two men talking to one another, the majority of feedback I'm getting right now about the book is from men. And I think part of that has to do with exactly what you just said. A lot of men are dealing with this in isolation. They don't like to talk about these things, maybe with their spouse, maybe with a therapist if they have one, but they don't talk one-on-one with each other as friends. And one thing that I've found interesting is that I made great friends in the fellowship that I went through. And it's easier for me to talk to them because I've only known them for a couple of years about these things versus friends who I've had for 30 to 40 years. And I know that's probably intuitive to a lot of your listeners, but it's difficult because of the baggage that you've had or just the things you know about one another that you don't necessarily, sometimes you trust more than other times. Right. And with those who you don't know, it's maybe a little bit easier to talk about. And I can tell you, Todd, that the response that I'm getting via email, for example, always starts out with, I don't know if you knew this about me, but, and then it's a laundry list of things that they've been through that some people who I've known for a very, very long time, and just me taking the step of writing some of these things down and being vulnerable and transparent helps them now share. And so that, to your point, is what I would love to have people do, is just share. with one another. And I'm sorry, I took us off track there a
No,
little
you
bit
didn't take
with
us
your
on track at
question,
all.
but
This is absolutely a key part of the conversation, especially for men. Look, I am an executive coach. I work with a lot of founders, CEOs, C-suite people. And when I get hired to do something, it's usually around leadership development, mastering communication and influence, like how to develop language, all these things, because it sounds good and it sounds important. And it is, I'm not demeaning these things.
right.
Usually by the second or third session, I am akin to a therapist where someone trusts me and they open up to me and they start talking about the real things, that are happening, the real insecurity, the real doubt, the real concern that they have for the future or real challenging relationships that they're going on. And that's okay, because that's actually the terrain by which we make deeper and real change, is in these authentic, vulnerable spaces. And as the world continues to spiral out of control and AI is going crazy and everyone's on Claude and chat, that's fine. These are not bad tools. But I mean, my opinion, Jeff, is that the human connection is what needs to come back full force. And I think it is.
100%.
I'm seeing it, in my own work and the communities that I'm building. There's a big push for people to come together, and reinvention, has a lot to do with that as a philosophy. But I'm curious now, let's talk about your story now. So you're you're in therapy, you start writing, because we want to see where this goes for someone like you, right? All right. So you found something else. Tell me, why writing? Was it always a story in your head that you wanted to be a writer, or did that emerge suddenly? How did this start to happen where you started to see some light?
Well, the initial concept actually for the book was the communications person who couldn't communicate his own transition. And I thought that, yeah, sure, great concept. I don't know if people are going to buy into that, but it's a little bit niche. And I don't know, I started talking to the publisher about an idea that I had and about being more comfortable with discomfort that exists in our lives, and started going down that path and realized, Todd, that if I was going to do it, I needed to be really vulnerable, really authentic, and really human in what I was writing. And that was a big decision that I had to make. And once I started kind of piecing conceptually the purgatory concept together, it allowed me to be very introspective and look at my entire life, from my first job and why I did that, to my father's death and how I avoided the emotion of that and didn't get into therapy after that until 8 years after he was gone. And that caused a lot of spiraling just emotionally and further suppressing my emotion, jumping into work, all of those things. And all of these dots really started to connect just from a behavioral pattern standpoint. I learned a lot at looking back at all of those things throughout my life, just from a behavior standpoint that I wasn't aware of when they were happening. It was in a way sometimes better than therapy because I was doing it myself. I was actually doing the work myself. And I think that's the important piece here too, is that if you have the time to start to do the work yourself, that's important work to do. And it's meaningful, and it can get you out of making some of the same mistakes or repeating some of the same patterns, or frankly, just learning a little bit more about what makes you tick and why you do the things that you do. And for me, I just learned a ton about how I suppress emotions over time, how some of the relationships that I've had were unfair to the others who I was having the relationship with, and me. And it's just all of that's uncovered. It was through writing, but it was also through just the mental process of even reliving some of those things.
Yeah. Well, you're a warrior, brother. I mean, this is not the easy path to look at some of these perceived shortcomings or limitations. I mean, when you talk about your father dying and passing, I'm so sorry. How old were you when he passed, and how old was he?
32, he was 59.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
it was over a course of a month. So he entered ICU basically in February, was dead by the end of March. And so one interesting thing that I write about in the book is that one of our last meaningful conversations was about passwords, bank passwords, 401k passwords, all of that. I would say he was emotionally reserved throughout his life. I was also kind of battling, okay, this isn't going to happen. And I was completely focused on getting a job done, trying to fix him. I was on my computer every day talking to physicians across the country, seeing if we could figure out a better treatment path, what was wrong, all of those things, and avoiding really what was happening to him. And I had an interesting conversation the other day, and I'll make this quick, but it was with another friend of mine whose spouse had actually passed away. And he said that we didn't really have to have a lot of that conversation because we'd been married for so long. We knew that we loved each other. We didn't have to have that conversation. And he was asking why I wrote about it that way in the book. Did I need to have a conversation? And I said, I think I did. Yes. That's one regret, that I left something on the table there that I needed to either satisfy my emotion, maybe satisfy my father's emotions. Don't know. But it was one of those things where I look back and say, yeah, I had a business conversation with my father when at that time he probably had 3 weeks left to live and he didn't know it.
When you say regret, what would you have wanted to say?
I would probably want to tell him more about my life. I don't know that I told him enough about my life, my work, what made me excited about, doing the thing that I was doing, what made me excited about being married, all of those things. And I think we had a great relationship, but it was just very emotionally reserved. So I don't know if we've ever could have gotten to that point. And look, I was a young, dumb 32-year-old who hadn't really lived enough life to, have any grand wisdom in a conversation. But even that small talk would have meant a little bit more than just having a conversation about, let's get the business done at hand. I mean, now I look back and one of my questions in the book is that I hope he's proud of me for what I've done, because he never really knew me as a full-blown adult. I obviously wouldn't have asked him that then necessarily, because I don't know if I would have needed that answer, but it would have been at a more emotional level. I don't know, dad-son talk.
Appreciate you going there with me, because I've met you today, right? But it feels like what's unfolding for your life, which is a very authentic man who's opening himself up. Of course he's proud of you. Like this, you're opening up to understand who you are, and you're trying to help others do the same. And what's more worthwhile than that? It brings me back to years back. I did this thing called the Hoffman process, which I never really talked about.
I'm doing it at the end of August.
Oh, get out of here.
Yeah.
So Hoffman's deep. I'm not going to say any of the keys here, but Hoffman process is kind of like a 7-day process where you go into a retreat, and you turn off your phone and you go through this process called the Hoffman process. It's been around since the 60s. And when I did it in the early 2000s, it was framed as kind of, the best way to deal with mommy and daddy issues, right? The best way to really get to the core of it. And I will say that a lot of what I did in Hoffman sticks to me in this day, because it deleted some of these stories that were topical and got me into the heart, into the real understanding that this life is really short, like I said before, and that these relationships really matter. And that while I have stories around my parents, that are not always easy, that they're just doing their best and I'm doing my best. And the best way I can show up in this world is to be authentic with them, and to share. And that did open up a whole new series of activities between us that wasn't there before. And so I'm so glad I brought it up. I'm so glad that you're doing that. It feels right on for what you're doing. And so there may be a part 2 on that after you do Hoffman. We could talk about it, but
yeah, definitely.
Let's stay on the journey here, because, you've gone through this process, you found writing, you're opening up. From where you're at, do you see the process of reinvention, and you frame it as kind of going into purgatory? Do you see it as something by which, people can go through it easier than you did? Are there things that you're teaching that can help people get through this process and land on their feet quicker without having to hit rock bottom like you said you did? Because that's a big question that I have just in general with the process of transformation. Like, do you have to fall all the way down? Because most people are so scared of that. They don't want to look that bad, in front of their whole network, in front of their lives, in front of their spouses. Like, is there a way to go through this process by holding a sense of dignity, and holding a sense of, I'm still moving forward and creating good stuff? Or do you believe that it's a big rewrite for most people and that we do really need to confront these things that we haven't before? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know that people have to necessarily hit rock bottom, so to speak, or to be, in a very low place. I think a couple of things. With the book, it's permission, not a plan. And I think that's where some of the pushback is that people want that plan to say, how do I get out of this quick? I'm here to tell you that that's what got me in this cycle, is trying to get out of something quick and trying to reinvent myself quicker than I probably was ready to. To me, it starts with, and the thing that I'm trying to teach people is permission just to sit in and be uncomfortable, but also think about where you're going. And as I brought up before, who you are without the identity. And if you do lose something that defines you, how do you start to ask yourself questions and give yourself permission to be unfinished for a little bit and not go as quickly as you may have gone in the past? I'm not talking about months or years. I'm talking about if it's a week. If you have the time to just be with yourself, to understand what happened, retrospectively look back at what happened in the past and how that will better prepare you for the future. To me, that's progress. And part of that permission is what we already talked about is discussion, and discussing how you're feeling, what you're going through, and really being human about that. I like to tell people putting the human back in humanity is kind of what we all need today. But again, giving yourself that permission to just be uncomfortable. And I know that's very abstract, Todd. And I know it's not, okay, here's your 5-step plan and worksheet. I didn't buy into that because I want people to see that it's okay to be unfinished. And you don't need to externally talk about some sort of tidy redemption arc that you've had and shout it from the mountaintops externally that you've evolved or that you've done or that you found your next thing, because what you're not showing is the work that led up to that. Right. And I want to show the work. I want to show the work that leads up to whatever the next thing is. And if anything, I'm getting you or I'm getting a former colleague to see that scenario that I write about with my father in the ICU, to ask themselves some of those questions that I'm asking in the book if they're in a similar situation. And to me, that's progress. That's not hitting rock bottom. That's just being more aware of situationally where you are in the world and where that might lead you.
Right. I love it. I think the big fear that the people that I work with have is fear of looking bad to others, like fear of looking weak, looking bad, especially for men, but in general, looking like they don't have it all together because we spend our whole lives trying to make it look like we have it all together. One of the things that I found, and I said this several times on this podcast, is that other people really don't care that much. You're so worried about your image and your perception, but they're also dealing with all their own stuff. They're dealing with the same stuff that you're dealing with, but in their life, right? And so you don't have to put so much pressure on holding this image together. You have to go in and be authentic with yourself. And, you know, I have a practice that I talk about a lot here called allow and reflect, which is just introspection. Allow yourself to feel, allow yourself just to be. And yet you mentioned journaling, you mentioned seeing a therapist. These are all practices of introspection, asking yourself some of these bigger questions. I don't really think that people can reinvent themselves successfully without integrating that work to some level of significant degree, right? And I think that the world does not tell us that for the most part. Well, maybe on this podcast or others, but the truth is that that work is the most important. It doesn't need to take over your life. You don't need to become woo-woo. You don't need to go do the Hoffman process, although you are, and I've done it. You don't need to do stuff like that, but you do need to integrate. And I ran a community for a while where I had a bunch of engineers who were reinventing, like, you know, top level engineers. And I would say, look, just spend 20 minutes each day in meditation where you just sit and you allow and you reflect. Just 20 minutes, just do that. Can't even tell you how life-changing this was for almost all of them because they'd never done it. They'd never just like allowed their thinking to run just with the practice of observation and witnessing, you know, happen. Right. So I really appreciate you kind of bringing that piece up. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. The other thing I want to say too is that, and you hit on something that it's funny, I always give advice to people, but I never take it on myself. But the thing about people don't care about your story, your journey, all of that. The hardest thing for me right now, particularly with the former need for a lot of external validation, is running my own race. Somebody told me a long time ago that you're running a race and the person you're running against doesn't know it's a race. And so focus on yourself because they're not running against you. You think they are because you've created that scenario, but they aren't. And so how do you focus on yourself? That's the hardest thing for me to do because being a high achiever, being competitive, needing some external validation, that is very difficult. And I keep going back to what you said of, yeah, people don't care. And I'm trying to get that ingrained in my head. And it's one of the most difficult things to do right now.
It's reprogramming yourself in a way that you weren't programmed this way. And none of us were. Like the culture that we grew up in was high achiever, push, 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 all these things that we're talking about. But now, the rules are being rewritten right now. I talk a lot about AI on this show. I bring a lot of leaders in the space and technology, and it is forcing an issue. It is forcing the issue of, wow, like, who am I? Like the questions that we're talking about are accelerating right now. A lot of people are being forced to ask these questions. And I look at it as an opportunity. It's an opportunity to understand who you are. It's an opportunity to understand all these programs that are running and ask the question, why are they running? Why do I feel this way? Why am I running a race against that person, but they don't feel that they're running a race against me? Like, why am I programmed that way? And maybe more importantly, what would it be like for me not to be wired that way? What level of freedom or success might I have if I allowed myself just to be me, and do the best that I can? And here's what I found from sitting from some level of vantage point of interviewing a lot of really successful people that have gone through this process. On the other side, like, you don't really care. And all those things that you want, the external validation that you want, actually comes easier. It comes in a more natural way. It's very humbling to realize that your old programs are set up that actually limit your ability to have the success and abundance and ease that you want.
Yeah. And they limit your ability to be happy.
Right.
I mean, it's the search for joy that some people have never felt because they think that the joy came from the work. And that's also a reprogramming thing. I mean, I have this conversation all the time with my wife. She said, where are you finding joy? Often I have to say, I don't know right now. I don't know, because it's still hanging over in a way that is, I think I'm past it, but I don't know that I've ever felt pure joy in something that I'm doing. And so that's part of this journey as well, is that finding whatever those new metrics are that bring me joy, that bring me happiness, that feel like I'm making a meaningful impact that I need to make. That's kind of what I'm striving for now. And that's the kind of the battle day to day. But I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that, okay, yeah, the joy was tied to what I was doing. And that's crazy to think about. It really is.
I love it. I'm so glad that you're on the show because, you were a big, successful corporate communications officer guy working for big companies, right? So many people in my audience are sitting in the same boat, either where you're at in the process, or maybe even a little further ahead, some folks, or maybe some people are kind of sitting on the sidelines with the sense that, this is kind of coming for me, to some degree. And I want to hear some stories. I want to hear some people like this. I want to hear what Todd has to say just to talk about it. But, as we're getting towards the end of this conversation, and again, there could be others down the road, if you're someone in my audience that's sitting there, in their job, they know that the writing is on the wall in some way, and they've listened to this conversation because they love hearing about your turn into yourself and your personal exploration. And now that you're writing a book and you're really reinvented, that you're in the process of reinvention. And the question is so powerful, Jeff. Like, I never really had joy. Like, what would that look like for me? Just those questions. What would you tell them? What is the biggest piece of advice that you can give somebody that is in that boat right now that can help them move the needle maybe a little quicker than if they didn't hear this?
The first thing I'll say, it's not failure. And I think because a lot of high achievers are in this position, they're automatically going to think that they're failing at something by feeling these feelings or seeing the writing on the wall. And that, I think, failure is driven by fear of what could come next, or they don't know what's going to come next. So that's the first thing I'm telling people today is this is not failure. I go back to what I said before, and what you said, even if it's taking the time to journal, meditate, just be uncomfortable for a little bit in finding some of these things out, or at least exploring what could be next, or even what gives you a glimmer of joy in life, and start uncovering some of those now, so that when the time does come, you're not scrambling to try to figure this out and potentially falling further into depression or other things, or immediately jumping into the next thing, because it just keeps you busy. And that's what signals productivity for you, even though it may be meaningless. It's hard to deal with the fact that something that you're scared of, and you think that you failed because you're scared of it. And this is something really, and not to be cliche with my title, but it's really something to start to embrace. That uncomfortableness is something that we need to start to embrace in whatever that means for each individual. It can be different, but it's almost a reckoning to kind of embrace what's coming in order to be transformed and reinvented in the way that you see yourself doing so in the future.
On that point of staying in the discomfort, what are some of the tools in the book where you help people be okay with that discomfort? Because that's what I find to be the hardest thing in the journey. You know, for people, okay, they can say it, they can come to a podcast and resonate, but then they go off in their lives and then they're really feeling stress and they have this automatic twitch to do something that probably won't be the long-term solution, but it's just satisfying the itch, right? And you're saying something different, like, look, learn to sit with it, learn to be in the discomfort. In your experience, like, what are you saying in the book around how to like really master that quality?
Yeah. And I don't know in the book that I've mastered it, to be perfectly honest with you. It's more of that I had to go through the process myself, and I'm still learning how to go through the process. I don't like it. I don't like being uncomfortable. I don't think many people like being uncomfortable. And I'm okay with saying that because I didn't want to write I'm fully transformed and reinvented story. As I mentioned before, I wanted to kind of show the work. And I don't know if I have, because I'm uncomfortable on a daily basis. And oftentimes I am unable to sit with it and unable to deal with it. And I have to continue to remind myself to either step away, to go do some of the things you've talked about. Maybe I write down how I'm thinking. Maybe I go for a walk. Maybe I do different things just to understand why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling, what triggered me, and how I'm going to quickly move out of the uncomfortable space if I need to, or if I need to sit with it for a little bit longer until I've figured out what exactly is happening. And to me, it's if you can be more attentive or start to be more attentive to what gets you in the uncomfortable spots, the easier it is to get out of them in a productive way, not an unproductive way. And so that's my guidance right now. I don't have, as I mentioned before, a 5-step plan to get out of discomfort. You kind of just, even sitting with it, it's choose your own adventure on what is going to make you feel that you're getting the most out of that space. And a lot of it is introspection, and a lot of it's uncomfortable, and a lot of it's kind of on your own terms and your own doing.
Well said, my brother. You know, I just really love having you on the show. And I just want to add in one piece of my own advice for people listening to this point. And we didn't talk about it today, but the idea of when you're in that space of change, you know, or you're being confronted, is starting to like think about what future could make you really happy, you know? And again, we didn't think about you, but you just wrote a book, right? Is Jeff Curtis going to be this big game-changing author traveling around, speaking at events, you know, like even when I say that, I saw a little smile on your face, right? There's nothing wrong with also having a dream. Because I think a lot of times in this process of reinvention, people just get like, it's going to be so hard. Oh, it's, you know, I'm going to have to sit and reflect and sit in the discomfort. Yes, like there is that part of it. And I think one of the things that makes it really easy is, oh, well, what is possible, you know, looking out onto the future? What would be amazing, you know, if it happened? Like maybe this is an opportunity to dream really freaking big again about what's possible in your life. And like, to me, that brings the energy all the way back up. And then it gives me the fuel to go through the hard parts.
Yeah, I agree with you. And again, I know we're close to finished here, but I did want to bring up one thing about the reinvention, because of the story. So my wife and I just launched a nonprofit. And so that's kind of part of the reinvention story. And it's focused on something that we're very passionate about, relevant to my experience, et cetera. That's giving me a lot of juice right now. But what I will say is that what I have to be careful of, and what you always have to be careful of when you're kind of aspiring and dreaming to do something big, is that, are you judging your success by old metrics?
Yeah.
And then that starts to trigger a lot of bad habits. So it's great that I'm moving in this direction. And I think I'm really finding purpose, meaningfulness, all of those things. And I feel good about that. But I also feel equally bad when I'm triggered by some old metrics that would define my success. And so to me, it's still a lot of push-pull there, with both discomfort as well as trying to move my way out of that.
Yeah, well said. You know, I think the metrics are very important by which, what are we judging our success by? So that's a whole other thread that we can cover another time. But then I just want to say, wishing you the best of luck. I'm glad that you came on here. I mean, for me, I got a lot out of this conversation. I hope you did too. Make sure that you subscribe to our podcast because we're going to continue to bring in people like Jeff and people from all walks of life, right? That have something to share about how the future of work is unfolding and what you can do to get out of it. That's the conversation. I think this is the conversation right now. So make sure that you subscribe. Jeff, more soon. I'll share your stuff around, and I'm just grateful that you took the time to be here today.
No, appreciate the opportunity, Todd. Thanks for having me on.